Hi, my name is Dr. Harvey Miller, and welcome to the second installment of our chapter on supply chain management as part of our course on operations management. So, in this section, we will learn a little bit about logistics and its importance and how it actually is part of the supply chain infrastructure. So, we all know about logistics because when we think about all the packages that come from, say, if you order on Amazon, for example, or some other organization, you order a product. Often, the company that you order from contracts with a logistics service provider. So in the earlier days, I used to see the Amazon trucks actually come to deliver, but now it's not the Amazon trucks delivering; it's actually third-party contractors and so on. Some of them are delivering in rental vehicles, so clearly they're getting these contracts and they're doing deliveries. So logistics is an important part of supply chain, and it largely has to do with really focusing on obtaining efficient operations by ensuring that all the key components of a supply chain are integrated. But in terms of material movement, really, is where the big focus is. So material acquisition, movement, and storage. So you're dealing with material, you have to acquire it, you got to move it, you got to store it. And so these three things form the heart of logistics operations, right? It's frequently a candidate for outsourcing. Why? Because if the value added in the product is done at, say, the factory or some kind of transformation facility, but moving the product from point A to point B is not perceived to be major value added, and it's just necessary. So as such, it can be outsourced to a third-party logistics provider. All right. It allows competitive advantage to be gained through reduced costs and improved customer service. If you have logistics providers and that's what they focus on, then you're supposed to be able to negotiate better prices, and as a result, hopefully get some good efficiencies, because that is the core business of that provider. We have different modes that as or transportation systems as part of the logistics sort of network. So you could have trucking. All right. So trucking is one of them. We see that all the time. Movement of goods between our provinces or from one location in the province to the next, depending on where the central warehouse is. So, for example, Sobeys has a major warehouse in Debert. If you look at where Debert is located, so it's on somewhere on the way towards Amherst. So if you are now distributing out of there, you could distribute to New Brunswick, you could distribute to parts of Nova Scotia, you could distribute to Cape Breton. So it's strategically located. So trucking, and then of course a lot of the movement of the goods is actually done by trucks, because this is pretty much a land-based area. There isn't any waterways around there. Potentially there could be rail, but it is my understanding that the bulk of the movement of goods in and out of that facility in the berth is actually done via trucks. So railroads are capable of carrying large loads. So grain, for example, is one. Even cars, and so there's some some piggybacking that can happen, where if the total space is not utilized, the railway, the cargo train can be used to transport other items. All right. So whenever we think about logistics, we got to think about four important points: point of origin, warehousing, transit, and destination. Where's it going? Where did it come from? Where are we housing it in the meantime? And where are we taking it to? Air freight is also another part of the system. It's fast, typically flexible, is good for small loads, and then it can be expensive. There's this sort of inverse relationship. The faster you want to go, the more expensive it becomes, right? Waterways, we talk about seaborne going cargo. So typically are used for bulky, low value cargo, used when shipping cost is more important than the speed. So if you're not looking for really short lead times, then you could certainly look at seaborne cargo. Okay, pipelines, moving things like crude oil and so on, chemicals across across countries in some cases. Oil pipelines traverse countries in Europe, for example. So used for transporting oil, gas, and other chemical products. And then, of course, we have multimodal. These are a combination of all of those combined shipping methods, common especially in international shipments. So, for example, you might bring the goods in on a ship, but then put it on a train to a warehouse, and then from their warehouse actually trucked to the various locations. So that means that how you store the material have to be able to be accommodated on the different modes of transportation. So typically it's palletized, right, or containerized. Faster shipping is generally more expensive than slower shipping, so that's something to keep in mind. If you want speed, you could use air freight. If you want cost efficiencies, you could use railroad, or you could certainly use ocean cargo vessels, right? So faster methods tend to involve smaller shipments, right, sizes, while slower tend to be larger, more bulky shipment sizes. Warehousing can be expensive, but if you don't warehouse and you try to ship directly from a manufacturer to customers, that could actually be even more expensive. So the fundamental purpose is to store goods, but also to give you the ability to do some consolidation and some other things. It may provide some other functions such as break bulk, cross-docking, postponement, consolidation. So what do we mean by some of those things? Consolidation is when you have products coming from multiple suppliers, and then you're trying to sort of put them together to make maybe larger packages or larger larger packages for distribution to retail centers. So consolidation can bring things together to create some efficiencies. Break bulk is when you have a large shipment of cargo comes in, but it belongs but you want to sort of spread it amongst a number of retailers. So in which case maybe a huge shipment of a particular product comes in, maybe 1,000 cases, but then a couple hundred got to go to retailer 1, 100 has to go to retailer 2, etc. So these different options, right, allows for the bulk to be broken down into smaller pieces and then shipped to the respective retailers. In terms of cross-docking, what do we mean by cross-docking? Cross-docking is when the goods actually come to the warehouse in one direction and then leaves in the other direction. They go across the dock. Alright, so they could arrive this way and then they leave that way. But these are different trucks. These are different vehicles that have to be coordinated. And so what happens is that the material that comes in is sort of like, placed here, and then it's actually mixed and matched based on the demands at the different retailers. So this could be supplying retailers over here, this truck could be supplying these retailers, and so on. So based on what they require, right? Based on what they require, we have to take the items that were brought in and repackage them into what these respective people need. So, okay, so it's repackaged. So we might take some from each of the package, the the shipments that were brought in, and package into one bigger shipment, and then take it to one subgroup of retailers and so on. So it goes across the dock. That's why they call it cross docking. Comes in here, taken off the trucks, then repackaged into quantities that reflect the demand from the various areas, and then shipped out. And typically, there's no inventory that's really left here, right? You don't want to leave any inventory on this platform. So you have to time the arrival of those vehicles with the arrival of those vehicles. Okay? Postponement now is really has to do with basically doing the final stage of a product at the warehouse itself. So at one point in time, before we had variable voltage transformers, if you were selling a computer to an area that used 220 volts and selling computers to an area that used 110 volts, what happens now is that the printers, the companies that are making printers or computers or whatever, would actually ship the product unfinished to the warehouse, and then when the orders come in, that's when the final customization is done. So the appropriate power system is installed depending on where the product is going to. And so that's an example of postponement. A classic example is buying paint. We have tints, and then we have bases, right? So you have the base paint, you have the tints, and then you add the tints to the base paint to get your final color that you want. All right? So that's an example of postponement. You're waiting until you get the actual demand. In warehousing as well, there is also channel assembly, where you have multiple channels for distribution, and depending on what each channel is serving, you may actually have the assembly of product for that particular channel. Alright, so it's actually an implementation of the postponement approach that we talked about. You ship components or modules, and then the distributor assists in assembling the products for a particular channel. You don't have to send a bunch of finished goods inventory. What you do is you send the components, and then you assemble them based on the orders that you get. You get better market responses and less investment because you don't have capital tied up in finished goods inventory. Third-party logistics, 3PL. Essentially what we're talking about here is the example I gave you in the beginning, where companies like Amazon is starting to use third-party companies to actually deliver their products for them. And so we call that third-party logistics. Outsourcing logistics can reduce inventory costs, improve delivery, reliability, and speed. You have to coordinate inventory with the delivery services, and may provide warehousing, assembly, testing, shipping, and customs. So it all depends on how big the logistics provider is. If the logistics provider is fairly large, then customs and brokerage could be outsourced to them. Maybe even doing some assembly can be outsourced as well. So the third-party logistics could do more than just transport the goods from one place to another. All right. When we think about the outbound flow of products from a facility, we often think about the choices of products that are being offered, how quick you can respond to customer needs, and then delivering service according to expectations. So these are factors that you consider when you're thinking about the outbound flow of products. Also too, we want to think about the costs associated with distribution. inventory costs in terms of storage, transportation costs in terms of movement of goods to final destinations, and the facility cost, the cost of actually running the facility. So all of that will give you your total logistics costs. And we could actually find ourselves in a case where we need to optimize, determine the number of facilities that we need to be working with. So if you look at this graph right here, shows the number of facilities versus the response time. If you increase the number of facilities, you get faster response time, which makes sense because then you can move the warehouses closer to the destinations and then shorten the distance they have to travel. However, if you increase the number of facilities, your facilities cost will go up, and you are storing more inventory because you have more capacity. Your inventory cost will go up. Your transportation cost will go down. All right, and when you add it all together, you get this convex curve, right, which has a minimum point. That minimum point is suggesting 3 facilities. All right. However, if we were to now look at the revenue curve as we increase the number of facilities, we will find that there's a point that maximizes the difference between the revenues and the costs, and that point in this case is 4 facilities. So the point here being that the number of facilities that minimize your logistics costs is not necessarily the optimum one that maximizes your profitability. Right? That's what you're looking at there. So other activities in distribution management includes packaging and logistics, selection and development of dealers or retailers, and then managing the downstream as well as the upstream. All right. So these are the factors to consider in that process. Let's talk a little bit about the idea of ethics and supply chains. So one is expected to have really good personal ethics in managing a supply chain. It's critical to what we call long-term success of an organization. The supply chains, if you don't have trust in a particular supplier, chances are you're not going to do business with that person, which can compromise your own operation. So it's good to find trustworthy, ethical supply chain partners. So if you want to build a long-term relationship with a supplier, you definitely have to make sure that there's alignment in terms of the personal ethics of the managers or the staff members of that supply chain. All right. Then we have to also consider the impact of the supply chain on the environment, whether or not the that the particular supply chain has a fairly high carbon footprint, or actually results in a fair amount of waste that can then negatively impact the environment, particularly when you start talking about things like packaging materials. That's always a problem. A lot of materials come in cardboard boxes, so corrugated cardboard, and how we dispose of that, or plastics, and so forth. So the supply chain can have significant impact on the environment, and we have to be careful of that. All right, not careful, but mindful of that, I should say. The Institute for Supply Chain Management has a number of principles and standards, and in the context of ethics, here's a standard that's important: that the individuals are expected to promote and uphold responsibilities to the employer. All right, have positive supply and customer relationships. Practice sustainability and responsibility, social responsibility. Provide protection of confidential information, abide by applicable laws and regulations and trade agreements, and then develop themselves personally and professionally to have the necessary competence to do the work that they need to do. Okay? Avoid perceiving propriety. You don't want people to believe that you're not acting in good faith. avoid conflicts of interest, behaviors that negatively influence the supply chain decisions, and improper reciprocal agreements. Make sure that reciprocal agreements are not ones that are quid pro quo and those sorts of things like that. It's important to make sure that there is ethical practice or ethical behaviors in the establishment of these reciprocal agreements. So when you start thinking about sustainability in the supply chain, two things come to mind. One is the concept of reverse logistics. Reverse logistics basically takes into consideration how a product at the end of its useful life can be returned back to the manufacturer for recycling. And so sending return products back to the supply chain for resale, repair, reuse, remanufacture, recycling, or disposal is essentially what reverse logistics attempt to do. And it's a bit of a challenge because the products that come back to you are not nicely packaged or in good condition, and so forth. So we'll talk a little bit about the difference between a forward chain and a backward chain. The closed loop supply chain essentially takes into consideration both forward and backward logistics, or the sort of the forward chain and the backward chain. And that in the design of the product or the service that you're offering, that you take into consideration that closed loop supply chain. So if it's going to be coming back to through the supply chain, how do you accommodate that in terms of your supply chain design, location? You have to make it relatively easy for people to return goods. You have to offer incentives in some cases. You have to have the transportation or the logistics network to move the material to where it needs to be. So you have to really think through, if the product is going to be coming back at the end of its useful life, what kind of supply chain infrastructure do you need to have in place? All right. Let's take a look at some of the differences between the forward chain and the reverse logistics chain. So forecasting is a lot easier in forward versus reverse, because if you think about it, we don't know exactly when the products will reach the end of the useful life. We don't know when they'll break. We don't know when customers will decide they no longer want it or want to return it. So you don't have a lot of that information. There's a lot of uncertainty, and so as a result, it is a lot more difficult to forecast, right? Product quality is uniform going up because they set of standards. However, the quality of a product at the end of its useful life depends on how it was actually used, and so therefore that's not uniform. Product packaging is uniform as well, often damaged. If you think about when you receive a product, you simply just rip it off the packaging. So if you were returning something back in that package, chances are it's not going to look as pristine as when you first bought it. All right. Pricing, it depends on a number of factors. So the level of use, the value of the particular product, the demand for it, etc. All of those things will impact the price of the item. Speed, often very important, though but not a priority for reverse logistics. Distribution costs, easily visible, but then it is less directly visible in terms of reverse logistics. When we say distribution costs easily visible, because we know that we take in the good, products that are fresh from a factory, sending them to a warehouse, from the warehouse to the retailers. When you're talking about return products, sometimes you have these depots where products can be brought into, so you don't know exactly where they're coming from, and then they could be brought to a central facility for sorting and cleaning. Then they're sent to manufacturers for recycling. So it is not easy to know exactly the path that the product is taken to get back to the manufacturer. Inventory management, not consistent, but much more consistent in the case of in the case of Forward Logistics. Now let's talk a little bit about measuring supply chain performance. There are a few metrics that might be useful to be aware of. Assets committed to inventory is one metric. So if you could take your total inventory, your average inventory, and you convert that to dollars, then divide it by your total assets, you will get this measure right here. And so if Home Depot has $12.5 billion in inventory, average inventory, and its total assets is $42.9 billion, then its percentage invested in inventory is 29.1%. All right. So this is one measure that we can use. In terms of other companies, just to kind of do some benchmarking, you see for Toyota is 15%, 34% for Coca-Cola, 2.9% for McDonald's. That means that they keep very low levels of inventory, and then retail, Home Depot, 27%. Inventory turnover is another measure where we are focusing on the cost of goods sold during the year divided by the average inventory investment. So if the average inventory investment is say $50, and then we have cost of goods sold is $500, then you've turned that inventory 10 times, right? So your total cost of goods sold, but then when you look at the average level of inventory, which and then there's a way to actually compute that, which is your beginning inventory Q over your final inventory over the cycle, right? So that's 0. So Q plus 0 over 2, which is Q over 2. So Q being your maximum inventory level, or the amount that you order every time. So in that case, the average is like Q over 2. So if you take your average and then if you multiply it by the cost, you will get your average inventory investment. All right. So having that and the cost of goods sold annually, then you get the number of turns per year. So if we know that there are 10 turns per year and that there are 52 weeks per year, then you can say 52 divided by 10 will give us an average that we have 5.2 weeks of inventory on average. That's what we are carrying, 5.2 weeks on average. And then it's turning 10 times to give you the 52 weeks per year. All right. So we see an example given to us in terms of inventory turnover from Pepsi Cola, the annual report. Net revenue, $63.5 billion, $28.7 billion cost of goods sold. Total inventory investment is 2.73. So 28.7 divided by 2.73 means 10.5 turns per year. All right. And these are some examples to compare in terms of number of turns. Anheuser-Busch 15 turns per year, 5. Home Depot 5. McDonald's 112. So that means that very low levels of inventory turns very fast. Dell Computer 90, Nissan 150. So very, very interesting item. Very, very interesting statistics right here. So now if we want to determine the average number of weeks of supply that we have, so what we do is we take the average weekly cost of goods sold, okay, and we try to compute that. The way in which we compute that is to take your annual cost of goods sold. So if you take annual cost of goods sold and you divide by the number of weeks, that will give you the cost of goods sold per week. So if you know your average investment now, and you now divide by this factor right here. So because remember what that is the cost per week. All right, the annual cost per week. So if I now divide the average inventory investment, which is dollars, and then I divide the cost per week in terms of cost of goods sold, cost of goods sold per week. If I divide that, then I will get the number of weeks. Certainly get the number of weeks. All right. So here we go. 28.7 divided by 52 weeks gives us 0.55 billion per week. Remember, our average inventory investment is 2.73. So if we divide by 0.55 billion per week, we get 4.96 weeks. Essentially, what we have. Okay. Other metrics include the order fill rate. That is, if I'm trying to fill an order of, say, 100 items and I get 90, then my fill rate is 90. Order fulfillment lead times, 7 days in this case. Cash to cash cycle. So if you pull out cash to purchase a product and then you sell it to get cash back, so cash to cash, how long does it take to actually do that? And then inventory days of supply, 50. And these are some benchmarks right here. All right. This model, which is the supply chain operations reference model, will actually look at different processes, metrics, and best practices. So you could actually take the various components of this model that helps you kind of describe a supply chain, if you wish, and then you could actually develop metrics for the various aspects of it. Supplier-based metrics, customer-based metrics, and so on. And then you're planning, demand, supply planning and management. So you're looking at your sources, then you're making the product itself and you're going to deliver it. However, when you talk about reverse logistics, returning the goods, finished goods have to then be returned and they go back into raw material. You have to provide an enabling environment for that, which basically is that enabling environment has to do with ensuring that you have information to manage the supply chain. All right. Some of the metrics that come out of that model, the SCORE model, includes the reliability of a supplier, so perfect order fulfillment, the responsiveness, average order fulfillment cycle time, like lead time, agility, upside supply chain flexibility, which means if I want to increase my order by 20%, 30%, can you actually do it? And how long will it take you to do it? Cost, the supply chain cost itself, and your asset management, your cash to cash cycle. So inventory days of supply plus days of receivables outstanding minus the days of payables outstanding. Okay, so that gives us the additional metrics that we can use in managing the supply chain. And finally, we could talk a bit about benchmarking the supply chain, which can be useful in terms of giving you references to work towards. Some cases you may have a different type of industry, different type of product, and benchmarking may not make sense. But it does not hurt where cases of similarity exist between two companies. If the companies can agree to benchmark against each other, then why not do so? Sometimes audits are necessary in terms of managing the supply chain to ensure that there is alignment with the corporate strategy, that there's trust, that the supply chain is performing, that there is an understanding of the role of the supply chain, and that information is constantly being shared. All right. So that brings us to the end of this chapter on supply chain management, and we will continue our next sections on the area of inventory management.